Now we have someone who has spent decades as an activist, as an organizer in the trenches, and then decided to take his wit and wisdom onto the stage as now a beloved comedian. His newest comedy special, Vacation Baby, is now on Hulu. He's someone whose humor lifts me up on the darkest days. I'm so grateful that you are here. Hari Kondabolu.
Well, I was performing at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 2011, and I was one of the few people of color in that city for that month, because the rumors were in fact true that Scotland is very white. And so I was performing every night, very late at night. And one night, I was doing my show, and I thought I heard a racist heckle. And I just imploded, just exploded with anger. And I don't remember everything I said, but I do remember discovering that when a comedian threatens members of the audience with violence, it really kills the mood. And so I'm just going off on what I just had said to me, and then all of a sudden audience members started yelling out, like, that's not what she said. First of all, I didn't even know it was a she, I didn't know who it was. You know, I just heard something that I got set off, and they told me what had been said, and it wasn't particularly useful, but it wasn't racist. And I was horrified, right? So I tried to explain to the audience why that happened and how, like, I had been used to, this was 2001, it had been a decade at that point performing, and I had gotten used to audience members, often white, yelling racist things at me, especially in the years after 9/11. I'm a brown person on stage talking about race, and I got so used to that. Sometimes they wouldn't yell, sometimes they would sit close to me on stage, and they would say things softly but loud enough for me to hear, and I had to choose whether or not to confront them in that moment and stop the show, or whether to just swallow it. And I often swallowed it. In that moment, I couldn't swallow it anymore, and I exploded. And it might not have been appropriate, but it was what I was feeling. I gave them that moment, and I told them that. And all of a sudden, somebody in the audience showed up, too sensitive. And I responded, not too sensitive, just sensitive. And I finished, somehow I got through the set, and I got a few more laughs out of them, and I walked off stage just humiliated by that moment. And all of a sudden, there was 4 of us doing the show in Edinburgh. Another comic, he came up, his name is Paul Curry, and he gave me a hug immediately. And he said that what I did was brave, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I just screamed at people and threatened violence. I was brave. And he said, because that audience needs to understand what you as a person of color go through every time you go on that stage. I needed to hear that, they needed to hear that, and even though you were wrong, it doesn't mean in the grand scheme you were wrong. They needed an honest moment from you. They needed that. They might not know they needed that, but they needed that. And he said I did the right thing. And I was struck by a couple of things. One, that I, as an Indian person, was helped by a white man whose last name was Curry, which means I'm constructing the future story in my head. This is Curry. And the second thing, I just thought about the number of times I have been either, whether a victim of racism or seen somebody else experience racism, or I've been in racially awkward situations, and the number of times that the white people in that space did nothing. Not that they didn't feel it, they just couldn't say anything. And how many times I had to feel that. And in this moment, I saw this person step up, and it wasn't in a public way, it didn't need to be, but in a way where he made eye contact with me, where he hugged me, where he knew exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. And I think it gave me a level of faith that I think perhaps I had been hardened and didn't feel was still possible. It gave me a moment of faith in my fellow performers and in white people.